against all such elements. Let's come to our second story, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns Pakistan's economy, the IMF-Pakistan relationship, the tranche that Pakistan is waiting to receive from the IMF, also the Pakistani rupee that has maintained an upward momentum against the US dollar, appreciating nearly 0.38% in the interbank market. Dr. Usman Chohan, political economist, joins us online. Usman, thank you very much to have joined us. It's always lovely to discuss economy with you. Usman, let's begin with the upward or the stability of the rupee vis-a-vis the dollar. Is it only related to the IMF and the news that came from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia of the assurance of $2 billion US, or is there more to it?
Thank you very much for having me on your show. As always, it's a pleasure. As far as the IMF goes, it is the largest determinant at present in the volatility of the rupee. Unfortunately, the currency is vulnerable to various factors, including internal dynamics, but also it is vulnerable to the energy prices, the amount of reserves we have with us, foreign currency reserves. So you should expect further volatility until this deal is signed, and in that sense, or the next tranche is released of an existing deal, I should say. And until that is signed, you should expect continued volatility in the rupee.
All right. Now, the IMF is expected to, release the tranche by next week. There are certain last-minute guarantees that, of course, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has given. The UAE will, inshallah, be giving as well. What are your expectations of once this tranche is released to Pakistan? Should Pakistan continue the relationship with the IMF? Do you feel it's pertinent that Pakistan continue and stabilize its relationship with the IMF?
Excellent question. Yes, Pakistan should continue its reliance or relationship with the IMF, but not a dependency or a reliance on IMF tranches. And what I mean by that is we have to start to look towards generation of foreign currency, productive capacity, utilization, lower inflation, and all these things through our internal efforts. And in that regard, one shouldn't rely on the IMF. It's a very difficult, system in terms of the requirements, in terms of the stipulations. It is a tough gig. But as far as we are stuck right now, we should not just have a relationship with them, but follow through with our commitments to the IMF, because we have a history of going to the IMF that dates quite far back, and this would be our 23rd or 24th program. Now the question is, how do we resolve the dependency for a longer term? And that requires changes in the structure of the economy, and that isn't easy to do, but it is necessary to do. And so I expect us to follow through with the commitments that we have made to the IMF.
All right. Usman, I'd also like to understand, our Minister for Finance, Ishaq Dar Saab, met with David Bloom, the US ambassador to Pakistan. A lot of discussion concerning our relationship were discussed, as well as strengthening our cooperation in the realm of finance and economy. Pakistan has also assured the US of its commitment to the IMF deal. How important is the role of the US as far as the IMF deal is concerned?
The US has a disproportionate role in the decision making in the IMF, and you can sort of draw a correlation between the periods in which Pakistan-US relations have been very warm. It has been easier for us to access or tap into IMF funds. And when relations have been somewhat strained, it has been tougher. So that implies that it does matter directly. But indirectly, the IMF's voting base, the shareholder base, still has a disproportionate US role in it, although other countries are seizing more voting rights and voting dominance. But still, we should take very seriously the importance of the US in an architecture that it in fact built. After 1945, Bretton Woods institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank came into existence under the auspices of an American-led financial architecture. Of course, the US has diminished in importance because it was 50% of the world's GDP in 1946, let's say, and now it is closer to 22%. So when we worry about just the IMF and World Bank seen through the prism of US relations, we should also also keep in mind that there are other emerging powers, financial powers. There are other emergent financial institutions. And so we shouldn't have a lockstep, a singular focus on the IMF for the longer run, because the financial markets have diversified and access to capital can be sourced from many different places, including indigenous strength, which is what I really
When
aim
you talk
for
of
Pakistan.
access to markets with indigenous sources, what are you, pointing towards?
For example, in the current economic situation, a lot of our export-oriented industries have slowed down or shut down because the things are quite difficult right now. Once these get started, restarted, reactivated, redeployed, you will start to export. Then that will get you foreign currency reserves. Similarly, your diaspora is very large, and it seems to be holding back on remittances if we look at the pattern month on month. And there's a lot of capital belonging to Pakistanis but overseas that can be deployed back in Pakistan. That capital continues to grow, and we should recognize that our diaspora abroad is our single greatest resource as a people, and we should tap into that. And in addition, there are new agencies such as the Asian Investment Infrastructure Bank, the AIIB, and other multilateral institutions which have a lot of capital parked, but they're looking for high return and comparably reasonable risk, not too high a risk projects. And so there are opportunities in Pakistan to find them. But in addition, if we also have, you must recognize that Pakistan has a very low savings rate. For a developing country, it's about 10 to 15%, but if you look at China, it's 40%, India, it's 25%. So our internal savings rate is very, very low, and it should be deployed towards investment locally, productive investment, not just go into unproductive sectors such as real estate, and that would make a very big difference for us indigenously.
All right, Usman, I'd also like to understand Ishaq Dar Saab, who was supposed to go to the United States to attend meetings with the IMF and the World Bank, has now pulled out of those meetings, citing political uncertainty and developing crisis in the country. He's also the leader of the House in the Senate, so I understand that. But the fact remains, will it affect if somebody else, another official, replaces Mr. Ishaq Dar in these important meetings? Will this affect our relationship with the IMF or the World Bank or this tranche that is supposed to be given to Pakistan in the next days?
Yes, it would, and this is a very important question. We have to also start to look at things from the IMF's perspective, and the IMF would like consistency, policy consistency, leadership consistency, so that it's easier for them to plan out a macroeconomic framework and then disperse funds that are applied towards realizing the macroeconomic framework. Not just this government, but in the previous government, there were switches of finance minister, and so one day the IMF is talking to one person, the next day it's talking to another person, and each person has different instructions or a different view on things, and so they come to the negotiating table disorienting existing dialogue. And I think this is very bad, because for Pakistan to indicate that it is serious, it has to have the same person, a responsible person who represents the will of the people, appointing ministers who speak on behalf of the government with a view to having long-term implementation of economic policies. That would be the ideal. And so, yes, it does send a bad signal if your finance ministers change abruptly, and that too not perhaps on the economic merits of the policies.
But he hasn't been changed exactly. It's just that he's been replaced by somebody for these particular meetings at the last moment because of the current situation in the country. That doesn't mean that we have a new finance minister. It's just that the person who will be attending these meetings from Pakistan's side will no longer be Mr. Ishaq Dar. Also, I'd like to understand the confirmation from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia of $2 billion US, the probable confirmation that we might have from the UAE in the coming days as well. How important will that be to stabilize Pakistan's economy? Should Pakistan look at other avenues? And if so, which should those avenues be? Should they be internal? Should they be external? Should we depend more on our remittances? What should Pakistan do?
This is an excellent way to try to frame what the role is of other countries, the bilateral stuff. So the IMF has behaved in a strange way. We have to realize this. It's behaved in a strange way because in order to release the next tranche of the extended fund facility, it has asked that we have guarantees from other sovereign nations that they will park X amount of money in with our state bank, which would then help to bolster the minimum amount of reserves. And on top of that, then the tranche comes to us. This is quite a strange policy. This is not something nothing the IMF does, and it makes you raise eyebrows on why it would be contingent on that. But since we required these sovereign guarantees, this assistance from friendly countries, this had to be a part of it. So we have done that, and Saudi Arabia has been the most forthcoming. There are other countries who can and should be forthcoming, including the UAE and Qatar and so on. And that is because we have a long-standing, important economic relationship. Communities live there. These are the two largest sources of our remittances. We've literally built these countries with our labor. It's not a joke. I mean, they may push us around at the airport, but the truth is that these countries have been built on our sweat. So they have to look at it in a long-term context. And then, of course, they are saying that we are happy to do that, but we want to see actual reform this time. If it's your 23rd or 24th time, we don't want to see you going to the IMF 25th time.
You talk of reforms, Usman, that's a very interesting point that you make. You know, when we talk of reforms, the Asian Development Bank very recently has decelerated Pakistan's growth to 0.6% in the fiscal year 2023. It says if we want to increase our growth to 2% in the fiscal year 2024, we need to have necessary macroeconomic and structural reforms. Which reforms should they be?
Above all, it pertains to the sources of drain on our fiscal deficit. This means we have, for example, a circular debt problem in the energy sector, and this is one where you really have to fix it in order to make sure the energy is used for productive reasons and doesn't dissipate or is, addressed properly. This is a very big one. The second is the nature of our expenditures. Since we are so mired down in debt dependency, they are arguing that you have to get this debt out of the way, not just the interest, but the principal. And then it's on the expenditure side that your government is actually too large. Your bureaucracy is too big for the things that it does. Does it really deliver public value, particularly at the provincial level? I myself am not convinced that it does at the provincial level especially. So there has to be work done on the expenditure side at the same time that we broaden the tax base for the revenue collection. These are the sorts of things that it expects the ADB encourages us to do in order for the GDP rate to increase over time, not immediately, but over the set of years.
All right. Finally, the World Bank also releases a report on Pakistan Development Update, talks about nearly 4 million Pakistanis being pushed into poverty this fiscal year. How can Pakistan come out of this current state? What should be Pakistan's long-term poverty eradication framework?
Oh, well, the amount that we have invested in our people is comparatively low, and therefore the returns that we reap from the investment in them is low. Therefore, we have to look at the investment in the people, which starts in terms of healthcare and education, which have not always been priorities at the district level, provincial level. And even though the federal tries its best, the federation has become hollow because of the system by which it disperses funds to the provinces. So if you invest in the people, you will reap a higher return, and that should incentivize the people who have been invested in to generate productive activities. That is probably the best way. I say that because that is the case that has been seen across Asia, which is now a relatively prosperous continent. And so we have to just catch up to the rest of Asia now. That should be our target.
All right. Thank you so very much, Dr. Usman Chohan, political economist, to have joined us, to have talked to us about Pakistan's economic outlook, about its relationship with the IMF, and what we should look forward to in the coming weeks and months as far as Pakistan and its economy is concerned. Thank you very much, Usman, to have joined us. Finally, before I go, this is the end of the week, so of course we'll be seeing you again on Monday. But a small prayer goes out for our Palestinian brothers who are still under the hegemonic attitude of the Israelis, and at the same time we also wish all our viewers a very happy World Health Day today, which is being observed to make people aware about their right to access to mental health. It is important for stability in any society to understand if you are under some kind of a mental disorder, you need to have that treated, and for that the launch of government's first dedicated mental health application, Hamras and helpline, will be extremely important for the citizens' well-being. Have a great weekend. See you inshallah on Monday.